In a quiet American town, a baby is born with hair covering her entire face. Her own parents abandon her in shame. But when a stranger adopts the child and begins a journey of healing, whispers turn into wonder. Years later, just as the girl blossoms into hope itself, the parents return with a secret that will shake the whole town and force a choice no one saw coming. The rain tapped gently against the hospital windows that night, as if the sky itself was anxious about what was about to unfold. In a small town tucked away in the Midwest, a young couple waited in the delivery room. The mother clutched her husband's hand tightly, sweat beading her forehead, while the doctors prepared for the final push. Anticipation filled the air. Soon, they would meet their first child. The cry of a newborn soon pierced through the room, raw and beautiful. Relief swept over the staff, and the doctor lifted the baby up for the parents to see. But almost instantly, the mood shifted. Gasps echoed. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The mother, breathless from labor, leaned forward eagerly, until her eyes fell on her child. The baby girl's tiny body was perfect, her limbs delicate, her skin soft and pink. But her face was covered in a thick layer of dark hair, spilling down over her eyes and nose like a mask. The mother recoiled with a muffled scream. What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The father's hand dropped from hers. His jaw tightened, his face pale as though he had seen a ghost. This can't be ours," he muttered under his breath. The doctor cradled the child gently, speaking softly. "She's breathing fine. Her heart is strong. This is a rare condition, but—" "No," the mother interrupted, turning her face away. Tears streaked her cheeks, not of joy, but of despair. "I don't want to hold her. Take her away from me." The nurse hesitated, her arms reaching for the baby, her eyes filled with pity. She had seen parents weep with joy and parents weep with grief, but never this, a mother rejecting her child at the very moment of birth. The father stepped back, shaking his head, unable to even glance at the newborn. "We can't take this child home," he said firmly, as though sealing the decision with his words. "People will laugh at us. She'll be a curse on this family." Silence spread through the room, heavier than the storm outside. The baby let out another soft cry, innocent and unaware of the rejection surrounding her. Her tiny fingers curled, reaching out for a touch, a warmth, a bond, but none came. The doctor placed her gently into the bassinet, wrapping her in a soft blanket, whispering, "You are not a curse, little one. You are a miracle." But as the parents turned their backs and walked away from the delivery room, the staff could only watch in stunned disbelief. None of them knew it yet, but this abandoned child, born under rain and rejection, was destined to change more lives than anyone in that room could have imagined. The hospital corridors seemed colder that night. Whispers floated between nurses as they passed each other, the story already spreading from room to room. "The baby with the covered face," some said. Others avoided words altogether, glancing toward the nursery with eyes full of curiosity and unease. Inside the nursery, the newborn lay bundled in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Her cries had softened into whimpers, as though she could sense she was alone. Every other infant in the row had a mother's warm touch waiting nearby. But she had none. The head nurse, Mrs. Thompson, couldn't bring herself to leave the baby's side. She stroked the child's small hand, whispering, "Sweet girl, you deserve love. Don't you worry, not everyone will turn away." But the truth was harsher. The parents had signed papers that morning, making their decision final. "We cannot take responsibility," the father had said coldly, his signature firm, while the mother wept silently beside him. Doctors tried to explain the condition, a rare case of hypertrichosis, something that modern treatment could manage. But their words fell on deaf ears. The parents refused to listen, consumed by shame and fear of how the world would see their child. By evening, the story had leaked beyond hospital walls. A local reporter caught wind, publishing a brief but striking headline. "Newborn with hairy face abandoned by parents at birth." The town buzzed with gossip. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered cruel jokes. And yet, in the midst of the noise, there were those who felt an ache of compassion for the innocent child caught in the storm. In the nursery, under the faint glow of night lights, Mrs. Thompson cradled the baby once more. "They may not want you," she whispered, tears catching in her throat. But someone will. Someone will see you for the blessing you are. The baby stirred, a soft cry slipping through her lips, as if answering back. And so, while the world outside debated, criticized, and gossiped, a fragile life waited quietly in her crib, abandoned by those who brought her into the world, yet not forgotten. What no one knew then was that this rejection, as cruel as it seemed, was only the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of that little town hospital. By the next morning, the hospital parking lot was no longer quiet. Reporters with cameras crowded near the entrance, eager for a glimpse of the child who had already captured the town's imagination. The headline had spread like wildfire. Small-town gossip turned into statewide curiosity. Everyone wanted to see the baby girl born with hair covering her face, the one her parents had walked away from. Inside, the hospital staff did their best to shield her from the flashing lights outside. Nurses whispered fiercely among themselves, angered at how quickly the story had turned into a spectacle. "She's not a sideshow," Mrs. Thompson muttered, rocking the baby in her arms. "She's just a child." But no matter how much they tried to protect her, the world outside had already given her a name: the cursed baby. Talk shows debated whether she should be placed in foster care. Some voices argued she should be hidden away from society. Others cried out in sympathy, calling for someone, anyone, to give her a chance at life. Meanwhile, in the nursery, the baby remained oblivious to the chaos she had sparked. Her small cries were drowned by the hum of cameras outside, her innocence lost in a storm of judgment and fascination. And yet, somewhere far from the hospital, a woman sat in her modest living room, staring at the evening news on her old television set. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw the infant's tiny hand wave in the air, reaching for comfort that never came. Her heart stirred with something she hadn't felt in years: a pull, a calling. She whispered to herself, "That child deserves love. Maybe I can give it to her." It was in that moment, unknown to anyone else, that the story began to shift. What started as a tale of rejection and shame was about to take an unexpected turn, because someone, somewhere, was ready to step into the storm. The television flickered in the dimly lit living room, casting shadows across the walls. Margaret Lane sat alone on her couch, her cup of tea gone cold in her hands. She had seen many things in her 50 years of life, but nothing had pierced her heart quite like the story of the abandoned newborn. The news anchor's voice carried a mix of pity and drama. Asterisk, the child, born with hair covering her face, has been rejected by her parents. The hospital is currently seeking foster care arrangements. Asterisk. Margaret leaned forward, staring at the grainy image on the screen. A nurse gently rocking the infant, the baby's face partially hidden by a blanket. Yet even through the television, Margaret could see the tiny hand reaching out, searching for touch, for belonging. She pressed a hand to her chest. Her own home had long been silent. Years ago, she had lost the chance to have children of her own. Friends had families, grandchildren, noisy kitchens filled with laughter. But Margaret's house held only stillness. And now, watching that little girl, she felt something awaken inside her, a warmth she thought had died years ago. The next morning, Margaret drove to the hospital. She wasn't sure what she would say, only that she had to be there. Walking past reporters, she kept her head down until she found herself in the quiet of the nursery. Through the glass, she saw her. The baby lay bundled in pink, her face still shrouded by the unusual layer of hair. Other visitors glanced at her with pity or discomfort, but Margaret's eyes softened. "She's beautiful," Margaret whispered, almost to herself. A nurse turned, recognizing the sincerity in her voice. "Most people don't say that," she said softly. Margaret's throat tightened. "I'd like to hold her," she said, her voice steady. Moments later, the infant was placed in her arms. And as Margaret gazed down, something incredible happened. The baby stopped crying. Her restless fists unclenched, her breathing slowed, and for the first time that day, she seemed at peace. Margaret felt tears blur her vision. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I don't see a curse. I see hope." From that moment, the decision was no longer a question. It was a promise forming in her heart. She would adopt this child. She would give her the love that had been denied to her at birth. And as she walked out of the nursery that evening, the baby still in her thoughts, Margaret knew her life had just changed forever. The world saw an abandoned child, but she saw a Adoption papers took time, but Margaret never wavered. She attended every hospital meeting, filled out every form, answered every question. And finally, weeks later, she walked out of those hospital doors not alone, but with the baby nestled in her arms. She named her Hope. The name felt right, because that's what this child had brought into her life. Hope for love, hope for redemption, hope for something beyond sorrow. But raising Hope was not easy. The first challenge was her condition. Doctors diagnosed it as a rare form of hypertrichosis, an overgrowth of hair on the face and body. Treatments existed, but they were slow, uncertain, and required patience. Margaret sat in countless clinics, holding Hope close while doctors explained options, laser treatments, topical medications, careful monitoring. Each visit felt like a step up a mountain. Still, Margaret never flinched. When other parents stared in waiting rooms, when children whispered cruelly in grocery store aisles, she shielded Hope with her arms and her love. "Don't you listen to them, darling," Margaret would whisper. "You are not strange. You are strong. And one day, they will see the beauty I see." The treatments began when Hope was just a toddler. Slowly, the thick patches of hair softened, thinning across her face. For the first time, her bright eyes shone clear without shadows. Nurses marveled, doctors smiled, and Margaret wept silently in gratitude. Years passed, and Hope grew. She learned to walk, then run, her laughter filling the once quiet corners of Margaret's home. She painted the walls with crayons, scattered toys across the floor, and asked endless questions with the curiosity of a child who was learning that life held joy. Each milestone, her first day of school, her first friend, her first time singing in class, felt like a victory against the darkness of her beginning. But the scars of rejection lingered. At night, when Hope asked, "Why didn't my first mommy want me?" Margaret would gather her close and whisper, "Because she didn't know how special you were. But I did. I always will." And slowly, with every hug, every bedtime story, every whispered prayer, Margaret built a foundation strong enough to hold Hope's future. The road was long, filled with hospital visits, curious stares, and nights of doubt. But step by step, Hope blossomed, not just into a healthy child, but into a living testimony of resilience and love. Margaret had once been a woman with an empty house and a quiet heart. Now, she was a mother with a daughter whose very name lit up the room. Hope was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to shine. By the time Hope turned 7, the whispers that once followed her had begun to fade. The treatments had worked wonders. Though faint traces of hair still framed her cheeks, her face now shone with the clear, innocent beauty of a child. Her bright brown eyes carried a spark that drew people in, and her laughter became the melody of Margaret's home. Her first day at school was a test. Margaret held her hand tightly as they walked through the gates. She had worried that children would stare, point, or laugh. But instead, something surprising happened. Hope's confidence outshone her differences. In class, she answered questions with a fearless voice. At recess, when a group of children hesitated to play with her, she simply joined their game, her energy infectious. By the end of the day, she had made friends who didn't see her as the girl with the condition, but simply as Hope. Margaret watched it all with tears in her eyes. She had spent years shielding her daughter, preparing herself for battles against cruelty. But Hope was teaching her something else, that sometimes, light didn't need to fight the darkness. It simply needed to shine. At home, Hope blossomed even more. She took to drawing, filling sketchbooks with pictures of houses, trees, and smiling families. One evening, Margaret found a drawing taped to the fridge, a stick figure of herself holding hands with Hope, a bright sun overhead. At the top, in bold letters written with crayon, Hope had scribbled, "My real mom." Margaret pressed the paper to her chest and wept quietly, overwhelmed by the weight of those words. Hope's story began to spread again, but this time, not through headlines of rejection. Instead, she became known in the community for her resilience. Teachers spoke of her determination. Neighbors admired the bond between her and Margaret. Slowly, the cruel nickname, the cursed baby, faded, replaced by a different one whispered kindly, the miracle child. And as Hope grew older, she began to carry her story with pride. At a school assembly, when asked to share something about herself, she stood tall before the microphone and said, "I was born different. My first parents didn't want me. But my mom, my real mom, chose me. And that's why I'm not ashamed. I'm proud. The room erupted in applause. Margaret, sitting in the back, couldn't stop her tears. Hope was no longer just surviving treatments and pity. She was stepping into the world with courage, rewriting the story that had begun with rejection. For Margaret, it felt like watching a flower bloom after years of careful tending. For Hope, it was the beginning of a life she had always deserved. A new chapter had truly begun. It had been more than a decade since the night of Hope's birth. By now, she was a teenager, tall and graceful, her hair tied neatly back, her face radiant with the confidence of someone who had overcome storms. Margaret often looked at her and thought, if only those who abandoned her could see her now. But fate has a way of circling back. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted across the front porch, Margaret opened her door to find a man and woman standing there. Their faces were older, wearier, etched with lines of regret. But Margaret recognized them instantly. Hope's biological parents. Her breath caught. For years, she had prepared herself for this possibility. But still, the sight of them made her chest tighten. Please, the mother said softly, her voice breaking, we need to see her. We made a mistake. Hope was in the living room, sketching quietly when she heard the voices. Curiosity pulled her to the door. She stopped short, her eyes darting between Margaret's stiff posture and the strangers on the porch. Who are they? Hope asked. Margaret hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorframe. But the father stepped forward. His voice cracked as he said, We're your parents. The words hit the air like a stone thrown into still water. Hope's eyes widened, her body stiffening. For years, she had asked why her birth parents left her. For years, Margaret had answered with gentle honesty, never hiding the truth, but never speaking their names. And now here they stood. Hope's voice trembled. Parents? You mean, the ones who didn't want me? The mother wept openly. We were scared, ashamed, we didn't understand. We were wrong, Hope. We've carried this guilt every day since. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Margaret placed a protective hand on Hope's shoulder, her eyes sharp with caution. She wanted to slam the door, to shield her daughter from reopening wounds that had only just healed. But Hope surprised them all. She stepped forward, her gaze steady, her voice stronger than anyone expected. You had your chance, she said, her tone calm, but laced with hurt. You left me when I needed you most. And the only reason I'm standing here today is because she glanced back at Margaret, chose me. The parents bowed their heads, shame written in every line of their faces. Hope didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she stood tall, her presence commanding. For the first time, the roles had reversed. The parents were the ones seeking acceptance, and the daughter was the one holding the power to give or deny it. The question that lingered was not whether they deserved forgiveness, but whether Hope would give it. The porch was silent except for the rustle of autumn leaves. Margaret's heart pounded as she stood behind Hope, her hand still resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. She wanted to protect her, to shut the door and never let these people, who had once abandoned her, step into Hope's life again. But Hope didn't flinch. She looked straight at the two strangers who had given her life but denied her love. I should hate you, she began, her voice steady but trembling with emotion. I should turn my back, just like you turned yours on me. The mother sobbed openly, her hands clasped together as though in prayer. The father's lips quivered, but no words came. Hope drew in a long breath. But I've learned something from my mom, my real mom, she said, glancing at Margaret with a soft smile. She taught me that love isn't about blood. It's about choice. And she chose me when you didn't. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, pride and relief flooding through her. Hope stepped closer, her voice calm but cutting. I don't need you in my life to feel whole. But I do forgive you. The words struck like lightning. Forgiveness. Not because they deserved it, but because she refused to carry the weight of their rejection any longer. The parents broke down in tears. For years they had imagined anger, imagined doors slammed in their faces, imagined curses for what they had done. But forgiveness, that was something they never expected. Hope continued, her tone firm. You don't get to call yourselves my parents anymore. That title belongs to the woman who raised me. But you do get something else. You get to walk away today knowing that the little girl you abandoned grew into someone stronger than you ever imagined. And she doesn't hate you. Margaret's chest swelled with emotion as she wrapped an arm around Hope, pulling her close. The mother and father nodded through their tears, speechless, and slowly turned to leave. As they walked down the path, the town that had once judged, mocked, and whispered about the cursed baby would soon hear of what had happened, that the girl once rejected had chosen forgiveness over bitterness. Inside the house, Hope curled into Margaret's arms. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. Margaret kissed her forehead. "And I love you, more than anything in this world." For the rest of her life, people would remember Hope's story, not as a tale of shame or rejection, but as a story of love, resilience, and a young girl who taught an entire town that forgiveness can be the most surprising ending of all.